So to quickly go over comparative psychology, in contrast to ethologists, comparative psychologists believed in working in the lab, minimizing confounds entirely as much as possible, removing all of those other variables, emphasizing observable, quantifiable patterns of behavior replicable, saying basically that good science can't be done under uncontrolled conditions. So a lot of them would actually dismiss a lot of the ethologists' work. They were looking mostly at learning and the physiological basis of behavior. They believed strongly in what's called Morgan's Canon. So C. Lloyd Morgan basically tried to move comparative psychology away from these anthropomorphic claims like Darwin had or like Romanes did with his list of behavior of emotions. The canon basically says that behavior must be explained in the simplest way that is consistent with the evidence. Basically, don't confuse human emotions or mental abilities with the behaviors of animals. The canon itself is when two explanations for behavior appear equally valid, the simpler is preferred. So this is very similar to a number of different laws of behavior interpretation. Occam's razor, for example, one should not increase beyond what is necessary the number of entities required to explain anything. And the law of parsimony, which is basically that one should always choose the simplest explanation of a phenomenon, the one that requires the fewest leaps of logic. Morgan's Canon is basically Occam's razor or the law of parsimony, but specifically about the minds of animals. Knowledge of the minds of animals depends on careful introspection with one's own mind and on assuming that the simplest mental processes are reflected in animal behavior. So that's the main difference here. Morgan's Canon is specifically about interpreting animals' behavior. One thing, though, is that a lot of the behaviorists tend to simplify past the point of rationalization, in my opinion, and others. Albert Einstein even said that everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. You need to be very careful at oversimplifying or removing better explanations in search of the absolute simplest. Even Morgan saw some of the problems with his canon and added a rider to it, basically, that said, "To this may it be added, lest the range of the principle be misunderstood, that the canon by no means excludes interpretation of a particular act as the outcome of higher mental processes if we already have independent evidence of their occurrence in the agent." So if we already know that animals can do something, then it is absolutely, you can interpret their behavior as being the result of that mental process. So behaviorism was basically what comparative psychologists use. That's the school of psychology that restricts the study of behavior to events that can be seen and the description of the stimuli and the response that it elicits, very much avoiding discussion of the mental processes in between. They focused mainly on learning ability and stated that all experiments needed to be conducted under controlled conditions in the laboratory. Basic tenet of operant conditioning learning is that rewarded behavior is repeated. Behavior that is rewarded tends to be repeated or increase in frequency. Learning is measured as the number of responses over time. They also believe that species share those principles of learning. As I stated, general laws of learning transcended all species and problems. Learning wasn't the only thing that comparative psychologists studied, though. They did also look at physiological bases of behavior, particularly neurological mechanisms. Pierre Florin studied the relationship between behavior and brain structure, removing parts of brain of the rat to look for the effect on the animal behavior. Now, this sounds horrible, and it is. But interesting things were found. For example, he found that learning happened all over the brain in the rat. So he could remove lots of different parts of the brain of the rat, and the rat could still run a maze that it had learned. So that learning is distributed throughout the brain. More recently, ethology and comparative psychology have given way to more interdisciplinary fields like sociobiology. that basically is also called behavioral ecology, looking at the application of evolutionary theory to social behavior. That led to that belief in inclusive fitness, like we talked about, that we'll go through again. Ethology came back around, but interdisciplinary methods actually include interactions with biology for neurobiological information and genetic information that might change the way animals behave. Cognitive ethology, which is basically animal cognition, and that's how animals think, and applied animal behavior. It's important to note that all of the studies of animals in laboratories are guided by different ethical bodies. You can get in quite a lot of trouble for misconduct with your animal subjects. Guidelines come from different sources: NIH, the Office of Animal Care and Use, the USDA and APHIS, the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service. All research is approved by an IACUC, that's the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee within each research facility. For example, USM has their own IACUC. And the guiding rule are the 3 R's. Replacement, that is, can you do this without animals? Reduction, what's the minimum number of animals you need in order for the statistics to be valid? And refinement, if it is going to cause pain to the animal, how can you minimize that pain, stress, or discomfort? You start with the first R, replacement, move to reduction, and only after that do you look at refinement processes. And that has to be approved by the IACUC. And the IACUC includes scientists, it includes academics from outside the sciences, and it includes people from the general community in order to keep that moral compass as close to reality as we can.